My name is David Brown. I have a blog called The Trendy Troodon, and I'm the author of a number of ebooks, most from a long time ago. And those include a novel called The Walking Dead, completely independent of the comic or the show, and a nonfiction ebook called Revenge of the Revenant Review that's all about zombie movies. So this is a video. I've already done multiple takes, a lot more than I normally do on this. I kind of sorted it out. It's following up on a couple other videos I did for Halloween on zombie movies. Those were about the best of what I'd consider semi-obscure and also what I call mid-tier zombie movies, and then the worst zombie movies. What I'm talking about here are movies I wouldn't necessarily consider better than the mid tier, but just the top tier of zombie movies. And here are the things I'm really thinking and meaning by that. One is that these are zombie movies that are professional and usually pretty high budget, as much as they could get budgets at that time, any given time, and we'll see these are covering a very wide span. They were reasonably successful at the time, or most of them were, and they were really influential. So when I'm doing these, there are some I'm going to leave out. The big thing is I'm not covering Romero movies. I've had other takes where I talked a lot more about that, but I'm just going to say I'm leaving them out of it. And that's really because I'm trying to trace the history of zombie movies and the evolution of the zombie movie genre apart from them, or at least around them. And I'm also going to try to focus on straight zombie movies. And what that means to me is not necessarily that they're free of humor. You do get a lot of that in zombie movies, but they aren't necessarily parodies of zombie movies. Or if they are, they're still doing the zombies pretty seriously. So to really get some momentum here, I'm going to start talking about one that I really hadn't meant to cover in these videos. It's called The Walking Dead from 1936. It was with Boris Karloff. So this is what I've come to consider the first really modern zombie movie. And a big part of that is that it's just about the first zombie movie you'll find that is independent of voodoo zombies. The whole plot is that there's a man unjustly executed who's brought back to life, and he is kind of a zombie, though not like a Romero zombie. He isn't decayed, he's actually intelligent. He even seems to have the personality he did in life. And then the plot from there is that people who had framed him for the crime think he's going to kill them when it's more like he's confronting them, and they all get themselves killed. And if that sounds really weird, you're already getting at the problems with this one. I did a review of it where I gave it 1 out of 4. That was probably a little bit harsh, but I had plenty of reasons for that, especially to do with the plot of the movie. Now, what I am willing to give ground on is that this really is a big budget zombie movie for the time it was made. It cost about $220,000, and it was made by Warner Brothers. By comparison, Universal monster movies like Dracula might cost $250,000 to $350,000. So this was a little smaller budget, but still in the same ballpark. And of course, they did get Karloff. They had some other people who got either were or became well regarded. The big one, the director was named Curtiz. That's Cortiz. He went on, I've seen it mentioned, to direct Casablanca. I confirmed he did direct Robin Hood, and I don't doubt the people who say that he went on to Casablanca. So with this, it is, you have to admit, then, a well-made zombie movie, and it has a lot of things that set the ground for the rest of the genre. The big thing is with the zombie character, he moves like what you'd expect from a zombie. He's pretty slow. He's a lot of the time seeming uncoordinated, though that's a little bit ambiguous. A lot of the time, it seems like he is trying and able to stay on his feet. He just has to go slowly. Either he doesn't have good balance or he hasn't recovered his speed, or if he ever would. So the big problem again is just that it's hard to even understand what they were trying to do. When Karloff's on screen, it's like a serious drama, and really, it could have been as good or better if they hadn't even had the plot about him uh, confronting the people who framed him, even leave out the whole thing about him being framed and just make him a random guy brought back to life. But when they have the people who plotted against him on the screen, it feels like a comedy that won't tell you that it's trying to make you laugh. I mean, there's literally things happening that could be straight out of a Wile E. Coyote cartoon. The bad guys either freak out and get themselves killed, or they try to actually kill the zombie and then do something that gets them killed anyway. And that could have been a good movie. It does give some good moments in this actual movie, but you just can't figure it out. And I think from that, if had really been more fair to it, I think I would have just reviewed it as unrated. Uh, so that is what I think is the first really noteworthy zombie movie. Now, the next up I don't have, and as I said in my worst zombie movie review video, that's almost always a bad sign. Not quite as much here. That would be I Walked with a Zombie. Now, this is the most famous and really by far the best of the voodoo zombie movies. This was really something I wanted to try to avoid, at least minimize. And a big part of it is that a lot of it was exploiting a real tradition in a way we'd see as very, very problematic now. This is one that does at least take what it's talking about seriously. You can recognize some elements of the zombie lore. The big thing, the lead zombie isn't really violent. With the whole idea with the actual voodoo zombie is the zombie doesn't attack people unless the zombie master tells it to attack. But they did have a twist on it because you never really see a zombie master, and that's open to ambiguity. Maybe somehow he was brought to life without a zombie master. Maybe there was a zombie master who brought him to life, and the zombie master is already dead. And they had then a zombie played by Darby Jones, who was a real African American. You'd think that would not be a high bar, but it was not guaranteed for the time. Then they have it made by the same people who did another film called Cat People. So you have very professional, really film noir, you could call it, or the only other thing you could call it is flat out gothic horror. So you have a well shot movie. The story works pretty well. If there's a problem, it's just that so much of it is the drama about the least interesting characters. But you do see some people who really give context to it. You see, especially an older woman who is actually able to give orders to the zombie some of the time, and she calls him by name, which they never actually explain. People just know it, and nobody talks about how they know it. So this is one that's definitely worth watching. Now, I'm going to go ahead and move forward. Now, when you get into the 50s, even into the 60s, you still had the voodoo zombies as the major thread, but you started to get some variation. And my pick for the best one doesn't even get discussed much. I actually would have a copy of it, but I don't have it on hand here. It was made as the Trollenberg Terror. What almost everyone in the US knows it as is the creeping eye, or no, the crawling eye. I had to think there. And this, it's an alien invasion movie, but the aliens happen to be able to bring people they've killed back to life. It's really similar to one I talked about in the best mid-tier, Earth Dies Screaming, though a few years earlier. So the zombies we do see, and there's not that many, are very effective. What works is that they really are very stealthy. They even show some intelligence and memory of who they were as people, even though they're supposed to be just under some kind of remote control by the aliens. And then there's one that carries this completely huge and hideous weapon. I think it was supposed to be an ice carving tool. And he's just walking through a lodge holding this thing, and he almost gets to one of the main characters he's after before anyone stops him. So that's a very good one that's out there and not too hard to find. I could almost call it obscure, but it is pretty well known, just not as a zombie movie. And then when you get into the 60s, you've really got a lot of movies that people don't usually talk about as zombie movies. One that does get mentioned is Carnival of Souls, but nobody really says those are zombies. Whatever the hell that is about, people agree it's not physical people coming back to life. Then you had Jason and the Argonauts, the skeletons. Those were kind of zombies, and a funny behind-the-scenes anecdote is that Harryhausen actually acknowledged the original myths were about living corpses coming out of the ground, but they couldn't do that because of the technology and just so they wouldn't get censored. Then much later than you'd think. You have by far the best one in the 60s. I could even give this a nod over Night of the Living Dead is The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price. It was based on a novel called I Am Legend, which of course was technically about vampires, but the whole plot is that the undead have taken over the world, and Vincent Price is trying to kill them off or cure them. And it's supposed to be caused by a disease, which I think is one thing that kind of dates the novel. I've felt like what would work now would actually be have that straight where the vampires really are vampires, which you can find done, but I won't get into that. And the whole vibe is really like a zombie movie. That's the big thing. And a big part of that is that they don't really try to make the main character sympathetic, like you'd want him to win or at least not die. But he does a lot of things that are for his own survival. Once in a while, something that's just vicious when he's fighting the vampires, undead. And they actually have an ending that's pretty true to the novel, which is more than you can say about just about any other adaptation. And then the undead themselves, they are completely low tech. They just look like humans who are having the worst time of their lives, which was really what they did with Night of the Living Dead. I mean, I've almost gotten into an argument with people. In Night of the Living Dead, the zombies don't look like zombies, they look like people. And Last Man on Earth is where you can really see that look established. So that right there makes it a very good zombie movie and a very significant one. And that's already using up a lot of the time I've allotted for this, so I'm going to jump forward. Now, another one I can't avoid, and this, the first few times I didn't care for it, but it's grown on me, is Shockwaves. I think this could be the best non Romero 1970s movie. This is the one that has Nazi zombies, which was not actually the first, but this was the first really prominent one. The whole plot, if you can call it that, is that these people stumble onto an isolated island where there's someone who turns out to be a former Nazi officer. He warns them that he was part of an experiment that brought the dead back to life. And then these undead Nazis come out of the water and kill everyone. It's really done like a slasher movie, but still before that, it turned into a very big thing. So you hate the characters if you care about them at all. You can kind of like the actual officer because he's played by Peter Cushing. You also had John Carradine in there. I think he's just goofy, which is how I've reacted to a lot of what he did. And the Nazi zombies themselves, they're intelligent, they're coordinated, pretty much the opposite of the image of the zombie that we have now, and they're really very ruthless. You don't see them use weapons, but that's really because they don't care enough to use weapons. But they're also very hard to kill, even though the one weakness that's shown is a very random weakness. They have these goggles on, and when someone takes their goggles off, either they die or at least they're immobilized. which I feel like you could make into something more interesting, like what if whatever senses they have can adjust to daylight. And that is another thing. You see them in daylight almost the entire time, and that was still pretty bold for a horror movie. Now, moving forward into the 1980s, there's really two big films that I might not talk about much. There's Re-Animator and Return of the Living Dead. These are both comedies. You can kind of argue if they're parodies. This one is a lot more of a parody, but it does take the zombies seriously. This specifically threw out the rule that the zombies can be killed with a blow to the head, to the point of showing them just chopped to pieces and still going. With Re-Animator, uh, there is a lot of humor, but I think it comes closer to playing the actual undead straight. And the big thing with these is that they're both done with the zombies as explicitly scientific, really pseudoscientific, but they give a rationale. It works a bit better in Re-Animator. And Re-Animator 2, that goes with the idea that whatever you do to the zombies, they can keep coming if they aren't completely destroyed. So these are definitely top notch. This one has the best special effects, really, probably the best practical zombie effects ever. It's kind of in a gray area between whether you call it makeup or more like animatronics. Re-Animator, they don't do as much with effects, but I'd say the quality is the same, if not better. And what's really infamous is that they have a villain who is still an intelligent villain after he's come back to life with his head cut off, and that leads into a scene I really won't even discuss. I will say with both of these movies, they have content that I a lot of the time will just skip. Uh, and really, I'm talking about these because I feel like I have to mention them. Now, there's another. I'm having to double check where I had left it here. This, I think, could be the best real big budget zombie movie. I've seen the numbers. It could actually be the most expensive zombie movie they made in the 80s. This is Night of the Creeps. Here again, it's science fictional. This time, there's these brain slugs that can bring people back to life that are from outer space. What really happens, they can just take control of living people and turn them into zombies, but a lot of the time they're just taking over dead bodies, and it makes absolutely no difference how old the body is. You see them reanimate things that have just about decayed into skeletons, or again, you also see them just take over living people but make them look like zombies. And what's really freaky, instead of biting people or otherwise trying to infect them, they just wander around for a while and then they explode and release a whole bunch of new brain slugs. So it's some very creepy zombies and a very high energy movie. It's another one where there's a lot of humor, but it's not really a zombie parody. If anything, that it's making fun of the people. Major scenes that are the people just being oblivious to the zombies. Like you have a naked, reanimated, bloody zombie walking through a corridor. a living person walks by and just says hello or something equally vapid without even noticing what the zombie really is. And this is really creepy in itself. The zombie just keeps walking because it's not mature. Uh, and what's really fun to watch is that they got an actor named Tom Atkins to do this. I've heard quotes that he considers this the best thing he was in. He was kind of typecast in cop roles, which is what he has here, but he was also in Lethal Weapon. He's really fun to watch. You could call him overacting, but a lot of the time it's really almost the other way. He's so subdued, he could be deadpan. So this is definitely worth watching, and I'm already just about at what I planned for the full length of this, but I have plenty more. Now, another one I think has gotten put down a bit is Pet Sematary. Now, this you can argue a lot whether to call it a zombie movie. Obviously, it's the undead, but it's not exactly conventional zombies. And what's most interesting is that there's nothing about the undead making other undead, which came in some of the others, the sequel, and then the relatively recent reboot. Nothing like that is in the book or the movie. Of course, the plot is that there's a burial ground that can bring people back to life, people or animals. So, a guy starts bringing his daughter's pet cat back to life. Then his son dies, and he decides to bring him back to life, or really almost doesn't decide. It's implied somehow either he's goes crazy and does it, or the burial ground somehow drives him to do it. What really makes it most like a zombie movie is Pascal. He's uh, portrayed both in the movie and the book as a ghost, but then he looks like a zombie. He's supposed to be someone the doctor took care of when he died, so he comes to the doctor looking like he did when he died. It's really about the same as Jack in An American Werewolf in London, which probably was made independent of the book. Another thing that does make it a bit more like a zombie movie is that there is a story within a story about a veteran brought back to life. Now, the thing I've been suspicious about a very long time about that is that it is very similar to the plot of Dead of Night, which I covered in the mid-tier zombie movies. Now it gets called Death Dream. Like I said then, Dead of Night is the real title. I very seriously suspect that that episode of the which was in the book was copied from Dead of Night, but it's done very well. Probably better in the book, but it's still well done here. And in the movie, what's interesting is that they actually do more to make the zombies sympathetic. It's in the book, it's implied it's somehow a demonic or pagan entity that's possessing the human body and just able to say things that the living person would never have known. Here it's more like he is someone who didn't want to be brought back to life and doesn't and wants to go back to being dead. So you can really see if you do watch the movie now why it hasn't aged that well, but there's plenty that is still good. And a big part of that is that they had Ed Gein as Judd. He alone makes the movie worth watching. And what's even makes it better is that there's real rapport with the child that eventually gets brought back to life. And you can really see that get twisted at the end, though again, that's different from the book. Here, they actually have the undead child acting like a child, and that's probably about as creepy as in the book, just a different kind of creepy. So, another one I definitely wanted to get to cover, especially the period through the 80s and 90s, is Army of Darkness. This is another one you can argue whether to call it a zombie movie. I'll count it as a zombie movie specifically because of the skeleton warriors that is following Ray Harryhausen, and that was influenced by the idea of zombies. And then you do have the Deadites. They don't really play as big a role. And then it is set up as a fantasy movie with some science fiction elements, and that in itself makes it very conceptually interesting. So it's another one that's definitely worth watching. And this is one other I'd meant to get to with mid-tier zombie movies, but I debated whether it belonged there. Idle Hands. This was done as a horror comedy, and I think it's a very representative example of someone who tried to make horror mainstream and just got trashed by the mainstream critics while being ignored by the horror fans. This is also a variation of kind of a tradition of the undead, the disembodied hand, which you can trace a long way back. And then the setup is that there's a complete slacker, and there's a demon that will possess completely lazy slackers just to use them to kill. So the demon possesses his hand. He cuts the hand off, only the hand's still able to move and attack. And what makes it a zombie movie is that the hand kills two of his friends, and the friends just hang around. For most of the movie, you could believe that these are just ghosts, like Jack and American Werewolf and Pascal and Pet Sematary. But towards the end, it actually does get explicit. No, these aren't just ghosts. They really are dead people who are able to move around. The rationale given is that they were able to go to the afterlife, but they just came back and got back in their bodies. And it really is a lot of fun. I got this a little while ago. I still haven't watched it, but I'm looking forward to doing that. It actually is a movie that succeeds both as comedy and as horror. It's even probably pretty good as a teen comedy, but that was where it definitely was striking out with audiences. I think if you go into it as an older adult, then you can really see what they were doing right with this. And that's where I'm going to stop this. So, what I've covered is what I consider the golden age of the zombie movies, especially from the 70s through the 90s. I might get a few more in, but from here I'd be going some different directions. I don't think I'm going to do this over again. I've just done it too many times already. But I will be trying to get in some more of the material I planned for this. So for now, I'm signing off.